Hello, Rob. So we're back with The Golem Remembered, 1909 to 1980, Variations of a Jewish Legend by Arnold L. Goldsmith. We return to Chapter 5. It's going to be the second part of Chapter 5 because this is a rather long one, buddy. A further clarification of the complicated multifaceted symbolism of the Golem is seen in the narrator's description of the Prague ghetto. The Golem is identified with the dark underside of the city. The discolored buildings in the rain resemble derelict, dripping animals, uncanny and depraved. They are like weeds rising from the ground, something hostile, something malicious, seemed to permeate the very bricks of which they were composed. In the drain of the dirty street, a bridal bouquet is seen, a bunch of withered myrtle drifting along in the filthy water. The narrator's choice of adjectives and objects loads the description with negative, unpleasant, mysterious, and even threatening implications. One of the most interesting hints is that of sexual depravity. Now that the morning wedding is over, the pure flowers of the bridal bouquet are wilting in the sewer. As the narrator thinks about the people living in these ancient buildings, he remembers the Kabbalistic legend of the Golem. And as that same Golem stiffened into clay the instant that mysterious phrase was removed from its lips, so must, I thought, these humans dwindle to soulless entities, so soon as was extinguished within them some slightest spark of an idea, some species of dumb striving, however irrelevant, already deteriorated, with most of them, from the look of it, into a mere aimless sloth, or a dull waiting for they know not what. To the narrator and author, the Golem thus comes to symbolize the sick soul of the ghetto. On the margin of Pernath's consciousness flickers the realization that this drabness and animal dullness, this extinguishing of the divine spark, this indefinable and threatening depravity, is what he, a middle-aged bachelor, a stranger among strangers, is drifting into. Even more ominous is the identification of the Golem with criminal forces. Pernath agrees with Charasek that the intangible spirit of crime walks through these streets day and night in its quest for human lodgment. It floats on the air, and we see it not. Suddenly it swoops on a human soul, yet still we are impervious to its presence. And no sooner have we sensed it than it has flown away again, and the moment has passed. Though Pernath does not consciously realize it, he is being attracted to this spirit of crime, this evil, hostile spirit, which he feels staring at him from the face of each and every house, with their doors looking like so many black, wide-open mouths with cancerous tongues. The Golem is discussed most fully in a scene in the gem cutter's room, where a few of his acquaintances have gathered to drink hot punch. It may be Pernath's birthday, someone suggests. Meyrink prepares the reader for further occult experiences, hinting at Rabbi Lowe's animation of the inanimate by having Prokop, a musician, comment on the curtains blowing in the wind. It's almost like a miracle when things that lie without a particle of life in their bodies suddenly start to flutter. From Pernath's description of the stranger who brought him the book, Zwack is convinced it is the Golem. Though he is generally well informed, Zwack makes an amusing error as he begins to discuss the legend, an error that Rosenberg, Bloch, and Liebig would never have made. The original story harks back, so they say, to the 16th century. Using long-lost formulas from the Kabbalah, a rabbi is said to have made an artificial man, the so-called Golem, to help ring the bells in the synagogue and for all kinds of other menial work. The Jews, of course, did not have bells in their synagogues, but Meyrink did not know this. Zwack continues, but he hadn't made a full man, and it was animated by a sort of vegetable half-life. This comment is another clue to the golem's role as Pernath's other self, the primitive natural force in man. Zwack retells the tale of the golem's going berserk, smashing everything in his way until the rabbi destroys him. Prokop says he has heard the story of the rabbi conjuring up the spirits of the dead and making them visible for the emperor. The modern theory is that he used a magic lantern. Zwack laughs at such rational explanations of the supernatural, adding, "I don't know how the golem story originated, but this I know. There is something here in this quarter of the town, something that cannot die and has its being within our midst." The other men urged the puppeteer to tell more. "I hardly know where to begin," Zwack continues. "Golem stories are all hard telling." He explains that every 33 years something odd happens in the streets of Prague. Not so out of the way or startling in itself, yet the terror of it is too strong for either explanation or excuse. A ghost appears. An utterly strange man, clean-shaven, of yellow complexion, Mongolian type, in antiquated clothes of a bygone day. It comes from the direction of the Altschagasse. Stalks through the ghetto with a queer, groping, stumbling kind of gait, as if afraid of falling over, and quite suddenly is gone. The apparition always returns to an old house near the synagogue. Zwack remembers that when he was a child, 66 years ago, the house on the Altschagasse was searched thoroughly to find the room with no door and the one barred window. They hung washing out of every window, and the room was discovered. As the only means of reaching it, a man let himself down on a rope from the roof to see in. But no sooner did he get near the window than the rope broke and the poor fellow fractured his skull upon the pavement. The connection between the mysterious doorless room of the golem and the mental condition of the gem cutter is brought into focus when Pernath begins to understand his strange recurring dream of being in a house with a series of rooms sealed off from me. The painful inability of my memory to function, where associations of my youth were concerned, all these problems had suddenly achieved their terrible solution. I had been mad and treated by hypnosis. They, the doctors, had, in short, locked up a room which communicated with certain chambers in my brain. They had made me into an exile in the midst of the life that surrounded me. Meyrink's intent is clear. If Pernath is to find true mental health, he must disobey his doctor's advice to forget the past. He must break out of the isolated room. He must break down the protective wall shielding him from unhappy memories. Only by reviewing the past and confronting it can he heal what Pernath later calls his bleeding halves. If Pernath can confront his double and survive the trauma, he may discover his ideal self and find everlasting peace of mind. However, there is always the risk that the rope will break anew as Pernath tries to look through that barred window of my inner consciousness. Suspense is slowly built up by various descriptions of the experiences other people have had in encounters with the golem in the past. Each has his or her own explanation of what the golem represents. Zwack, for example, claims that when he met the golem 33 years ago, he suffered a momentary paralytic shock. Everyone on the street was terrified. The only explanation he can offer is that once in every generation a spiritual disturbance zigzags like a flash of lightning right through the ghetto, taking possession of the souls of the living to some, and we know not of, and rising in the form of a wraith that appears to our senses in the guise of a human entity that once, centuries ago maybe, lived here and is craving materialization. Zwack admits the possibility that this strange being may exist within their midst every day without their realizing it. It may be like the electric tension in the air As a storm builds up, culminating in lightning which is needed to clear the stagnant air of the ghetto. Zwack's next comment shows the growing popularity of Freudian theory in European literary circles at this time. Something forces the dreams of the subconscious up into the light of day, like a lightning stroke, giving rise to an object that, could we but read its riddle, symbolizes both in ways and appearance the mass soul, could we but understand and interpret the secret language of forms. The arrival of the golem is always foreshadowed, continues Zwack, by some mysterious sign, such as plaster peeling from a wall in the shape of a person, or faces seen in the front of a window. Zach claims he could feel the phantom's presence as he listened to Pernath describe his meeting with the stranger in his room. He remembers another childhood experience when his family were amusing themselves by casting lead. That's how you amused yourself then? All right. Suddenly, as his sister emptied a ladle of molten lead into a bowl of water, the lump assumed the shape and features of the golem's head, frightening everyone present. Zwack is pleased that his theories have been corroborated by Shmaja Hillel, to whom the apparition that appears in the ghetto is a projection of the thought that had sprung to life in the brain of the old rabbi before he has succeeded in giving it tangible form. That was clunky. And it could only appear at stated intervals of time under those astrological conditions in which it had been created. That then, and then only, would it come back to the earth on its agonized quest for materialization. Even Hillel's wife claims to have confronted the golem face to face and felt a paralysis similar to Zwack's. She said, too, she was quite positive that what she had seen was her own soul divested of its body, that just for a moment it had stood opposite to her and gazed into her face with the features of a strange being. In spite of the terrible fear that had got her in its grip, the conviction had never left her that this thing confronting her was only a part of her innermost self. Here presented as the thoughts of a minor character who never actually appears in the novel is Meyrink's most overt statement on the meaning of the golem in this work. When Mrs. Hillel speaks of this strange apparition being her own soul divested of its body, being a part of her innermost self, that is exactly what it means to Pernath. The golem is his doppelganger. To reinforce the connection between the golem and Pernath, Meyrink has Vrieslander, a guest who has been carving a puppet all the while, fashion a face that Pernath and Zwack suddenly recognize. The wooden eyes seem pleased to have found Pernath, who realizes that it was I myself, I and none other, and I lay there on Vrieslander's lap, gaping. When Zwack cries out, God, it's the golem, and tries to grab the newly carved head to inspect it, Vrieslander opens the window and throws it into the street below, apologizing for his poor workmanship. The puppet head disappears into the sewers, and someone remarks that it's on its way to hell. In this manner, Meyrink foreshadows the underground journey that Pernath will soon have to take on his mysterious quest. The fog filling the streets of Prague contributes to the eerie feelings of the occult, and Pernath thinks he hears the sound of a hand banging against a metal pipe when the men place their ears close to the drain and the cobblestones in search of the puppet. To Pernath, these are the sounds of a soul in agony rising from the earth. Pernath's own agony as he struggles with the golem within is intensified when he accompanies his friends to Loisitchek's, the local tavern of ill repute. In this tavern, Panna Shafranek, an aged Jew, plucks a harp and sings a song about the blood libel involving two rascally bakers, Redbeard and Greenbeard, whose attempt to poison the ghetto Jews is prevented by divine intervention. This is basically the same tale that Chaim Bloch was to tell 3 years later in A Passover. Is that how you spell Passover? miracle, a story not found in Rosenberg, but apparently well known in Prague. Though he is surrounded by companions, Pernath is not really a part of their circle. He continues to be the loner, the alienated man. He is fascinated by the sight of a homosexual dancing with a nobleman, while the captain of the dragoons dances with the almost naked and drunk Rosina. Pernath describes the scene swimming before his eyes as being as fantastic as any opium dream. This figure of speech captures the feverish, almost drug-induced atmosphere of much of the novel. Confronted by this scene of sexual depravity, Pernath feels sick to his stomach and wants to cry out, but cold fingers seize his tongue. Just before passing out, he recognizes them as belonging to that ghostly hand that had presented me in my room in the Han Paskas, with the book Ibr. The paralyzed Pernath is brought to Shemajah, Hillel's room, and Hillel recites a psalm of David and lights one of his 7-branch candelabras in order to exorcise the golem's grip. The Jewish sage explains it's only the supernatural, the kitchup, that can strike terror into the soul of man. Man, he says, is like a burnished mirror. Once its surface is smooth and shining, it reflects all the images that fall upon it, without pain or grief. Blessed is that man, he added softly, who can say to his own self, I too have been burnished. This is the ultimate state towards which Pernath unconsciously strives. This is that fecundation of the soul which Ibr represents, but Pernath is still a long way from achieving it. Hillel is one of the mentors who can lead Pernath to this state of perfection. He offers his people a more positive interpretation of the golem than that given earlier. The man who sought you out and whom you call the golem signifies the awakening of the dead through the innermost life of the spirit. Each thing that earth contains is nothing more than an everlasting symbol clothed in dust. Such transcendental philosophy necessitates learning to think with your eyes. In other words, each physical object covers a spiritual truth which man must learn to intuit. He who is once waked can no longer die. Sleep and death are one and the same thing. When Pernath read Ibr, unknowingly he chose the path of life. Hillel advises him, as knowledge comes, so comes recollection. Knowledge and recollection are one and the same thing. Thus there is hope that Pernath's memory will return. The implication is that true knowledge of self cannot be attained without awareness of one's past. Pernath is beginning to feel a peace of mind and clarity of thought that he has never known. He is even able to solve the problem of cutting the gem which had troubled him before, but he still cannot remember his childhood. Nevertheless, he realizes now that in the scarce visible line engraved upon our being is to be found the solution of our uttermost secret. Before falling asleep, Pernath sees in his imagination 2 flaming letters from Ibr, one signifying the archetype woman with the pulse that beat like an earthquake, the other at an infinite distance, the hermaphrodite on the pearly throne with the crown of red wood upon its head. Before his soul can be burnished, before he can achieve this perfect state, Pernath must travel an infinite distance. All right, bruv, I'm going to stop at this point just because it's a new section. Athanasius Pernath and his quest for self will be next time. Goodbye, bruv. Goodbye.